Today, at long last, there was a breakthrough in Congress on something that's almost impossible to believe there was ever a fight over in the first place. After more than a year-long political battle, reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act passed the House today. It had already passed the Senate, so now it's passed the House, and that means it's headed to the White House for President Obama to sign it. Now, substantively, for victims of violence who depend on this policy for help, for law enforcement agencies who depend on this policy to help combat domestic violence, it is substantively big and important news that this has finally happened. It is unalloyed good news, substantively. But politically, what happened today is harder to understand. The Violence Against Women Act was first passed with bipartisan support as part of a great big omnibus crime bill in 1994. And ever since then, it has been routinely reauthorized with approximately zero contention. It has really become the very picture of bipartisan, non-controversial, almost feel-good legislation. There were no big outstanding complaints about the horrible Violence Against Women Act, which we've had for nearly 20 years. The last time it was reauthorized was 2005. Look at the vote in the House. 415 to 4. In other words, that's the Flat Earth Caucus. I mean, only the fringiest of the fringe from either side of the aisle was voting against this thing for any reason. In the Senate that year, it passed by unanimous consent. There was not even a single token wingnut voting against it. They didn't even have to hold a full roll call vote. They all just agreed to go ahead and pass it because it's the Violence Against Women Act. Who's going to be against that? Well, that was the last time the Violence Against Women Act came up for reauthorization. That was 2005. Only 4 people in all of Congress were living far enough off the kook end to have any reason to vote against it. But it expired again in 2011, and it was time again to re-up this totally non-controversial bipartisan thing, the Violence Against Women Act. And this time, turns out times have changed. This time, Republicans decided they are against it. They spent most of last year blocking it from being reauthorized. And now, this week, perhaps most inexplicably of all, after all of that time waiting, after it being allowed to expire, after it not being reauthorized, after Republicans fighting it tooth and nail, House Republicans decided that they are still against it, but they let it move forward anyway. So it passed. It passed despite the opposition of the majority of Republicans in Congress. So think about the end result here politically. What did the Republicans get out of this whole experience? Well, like all Americans, they get the reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act. But they get it along with their own record of being against it, which includes viral internet memes like this, which is the 22 Republican men who voted against the Violence Against Women Act. If nothing else, this visual brought to the attention of the American public the amazing headshot of the one guy who they put on the last line by himself there. Look at the headshot. It's amazing, right? Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri is not that weird-looking a guy, but that is an incredible picture of you, sir. That's his official headshot. What the Republicans got out of this whole experience is that roughly half the Republicans in the Senate, well over half the Republicans in the House, are on record voting no on the Violence Against Women Act. And it passed anyway, despite their opposition. So they willingly inflicted what is probably going to be political harm on themselves by taking a losing position that also happens to be super unpopular, but America gets the policy. What's the strategy here? I mean, as a person, I will tell you personally, I think this is good legislation. I'm glad that it passed. Why did John Boehner let it pass, but let everybody get stuck with the record of being against it anyway? I mean, Republican primary politics are weird, but why let all these Republicans go on record voting against this thing? I mean, to protect them from an electorate that would be mad about them supporting the Violence Against Women Act? Does it insulate you from a Tea Party Republican primary challenge for you to vote no on domestic violence prevention and enforcement? Domestic violence, really? It seems like even in the wackiest Republican Tea Party primary, this is the kind of thing you're going to have a difficult time lording over some Republican. How do you make somebody look bad for voting for the Violence Against Women Act? For one thing, the parts of the bill they were particularly opposed to, protections for Native Americans and for gay victims of domestic violence, those don't exactly make for awesome rallying cries in the context of domestic violence. I mean, what are you going to run an attack ad saying, Indians prosecuting white people? That's crazy, and I stood up against it. I mean, it's going to be really hard to make attack politics out of this. But nevertheless, they let them all go on the record as if they're all expecting primary challenges on the basis of their evil vote to prevent domestic violence. It's weird. They've inflicted this pain on themselves, and anything they might gain politically by having voted against it is marginal. They've essentially earned nothing to outweigh the pain they have caused themselves in the process. John Boehner has let this happen, and the Republican Party has kept its brand of being the party that has kind of sketchy ideas about women. Now, to be clear, this is kind of strategery fail in legislating. It's not only a Republican thing. You do sometimes see this kind of behavior from Democrats. Remember during the health reform debate, a handful of Democrats early on voted in favor of some versions of health reform, but then they started freaking out about the politics of it, and they voted against the final bill. The result, of course, was that they had not a friend in the world. No Republican opponent would ever let them forget their yes votes, and the Democrats, of course, would never let them forget their no votes. It was a lose-lose strategy. Vote both ways on health reform. That was inexplicable, but that was just these folks. That was a handful of Democrats, all of whom you have since forgotten about. What happened this week with Republicans and Violence Against Women Act is the majority of the party. The majority of the party took that lose-lose strategy that was so obscure and that affected that very small group of Democrats who didn't get it back in health reform days. The majority of the Republican Party took that weird strategy and made it their own. And what we have learned from all of this is that what was uber fringe in Republican Party politics in 2005 is now the majority of the Republican Party's politics. They don't have an argument for it that they can sell to the people. They lost the policy fight, and they're all on record as being on the losing side. I think that John Boehner is bad at his job. Where will the combination of his flailing leadership and the combination of fringe and confused politics with that leadership lead them next? Can't imagine. Watch this space.
Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. We do not give up. Expect surprises. Subscribe.